Greetings and welcome back to my channel. It's a beautiful Saturday here in New York City. And if it's Saturday, that means Jazz Record Center. That's a long story. But I'm really excited to review this Asia, the UHQR version of Asia. And I wrote a long piece in this magazine for our column called Revitalization, where we cover the amazing world of reissues that we are now experiencing in rock, jazz, world, hip hop. I've often said at my Facebook group, Jazz Vinyl Lovers, that we are living in a golden age of reissues, the like of which has never been seen before. And of course, we can thank the Japanese, as far as jazz goes, for beginning this trend in the late 1970s of reissuing Blue Notes. It has now blown up into this incredible industry where we have the Tone Poets, the Classic Series, UHQR, Mobile Fidelity, all the great work that Chad Kassem does at Acoustic Sounds. And we have new record labels as well. There's a label I've only recently become aware of called JLM Recordings. And they sent me some records I'm really excited to review, including one with guitarist Lage Lund or Laji Lund. But we're here today to talk about the UHQR version of Asia, and I compared this to 4 other versions, including the original pressing from 1977, a Japanese pressing from 1980, the Mobile Fidelity version from 1980, and also the new digitally sourced version. Bernie Grunman did the mastering on both the digitally sourced version for the LPs, which you can get for about $29.99, and the UHQR entirely from tape version, which sells for $150. And I already did an unboxing on this, but I thought I would show you some of the things that come in this package. It has the 2 see-through UHQR discs. They come in a nice plasticky sleeve. And there's plenty of information about Analog Productions UHQR quality pressings process, and they really go the extra mile. You know, there's a great consistency at UHQR and at Acoustic Sounds. And of course the lyric sheet. Now on the original digitally sourced Asia they sent me, there was no lyric sheet. On the original version, the sleeve has the lyric sheet, and the publicist told me they would be correcting that shortly. That was kind of freaky. An Acoustic Sounds 2022 catalog. Liner notes by Donald Fagen. Then here we have the credits for all the tracks and the engineers. Mastered by Bernie Grunman, played by Stan Bishop, and pressed at Quality Record Pressings, UHQR series, produced by Chad Kassem. Liner notes by Fagen. Additional design by James Wolfe. And you have photos of the original Dolby reel. Now, I read in the publicist initial email, this was made from a tape copy, a non-EQ'd tape copy, not the Dolby copy we see here. I believe that's correct. And Fagen's liner notes are short and sweet, but for purposes of this review, he says, when talking about engineer Bill Schnee at Producer's Workshop, where this was recorded, we'd been hearing a lot of talk about Bill Schnee, pronounced Schnee, an engineer who was working at a studio called Producer's Workshop in Hollywood. Bill was all about hi-fi and immediately understood what we were trying to do. This is limited to 30,000 pressings. The sleeve perfectly replicates the original. But I think it's interesting that Fagen says Bill Schnee knew exactly what they wanted to do when he was all hi-fi and knew the kind of sound they wanted to get. In the late 70s into the early 80s, and probably up until the present day, Asia and Gaucho as well have always been perennial audiophile records that are often reviewed in STEREOPHILE. Walter Becker was an audiophile. He owned Shindo equipment, just like I do. I used to run into him at In Living Stereo here in the city, and I still have his phone number in my phone because we planned to do an interview on my channel, if you can believe that, a long time ago. But that's part of the reason the sound on those records is so amazing. Some people thought the Steely Dan records were sort of antiseptic because set against everything else, every other record in the rock and pop world, and even in the jazz world, nothing sounded like Royal Scam, but Going Up Through Asia and Gaucho, and Two Against Nature and Everything Must Go. Is that the name of the last album? You know, Steely Dan records, everything was so precise. The top end was extremely crisp, the low end was extremely tight, so you could really hear all the instruments like you'd never heard before. And since they have some of the greatest musicians on the West Coast recording, it was just a revelation. And a friend of mine, Alex Halberstadt, who writes for STEREOPHILE and also writes for the New Yorker and the New York Times Magazine. Well, he doesn't do New Yorker anymore. He's the editor of the Museum of Modern Art's in-house magazine. He lent me the 2 versions of this Asia. He asked me once, what was so great about the Asia drum solo with Steve Gadd? When I was a kid, you would hear a song with Steve Gadd come on the radio, an AM radio. You knew exactly who it was. He played on so many hits. I think of Leo Sayer, I Feel Like Dancing. There's just so many of them, and you could pick them out a mile away because he had this trademark way of playing a rough, which is a drum rudiment, or just ghost notes. And it just, you could hear it right away. And he was on so many records, and I have a lot of those records. Gadd was a real innovator. Nobody had ever played drums like that in a pop format, where he orchestrated every part of the song, and every part was really, really distinct. Plus, he had all these beautiful ideas that had never been heard before. Some of it was based on like 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, where he's doing the military role, or Late in the Evening by Paul Simon, where he's playing his famous samba pattern, which he does at the end of the track Asia. But he was such a revolution in drumming. No one had sounded like that before and played such amazing ideas. And in the song Asia, which is a very complex song, it goes through the verses, and it has 2 solo sections where the guitars are basically, I think it's guitars, the accents are 1, 2, bop, bop, bop. Everything is off the beat and anticipating the next beat. So it's already off kilter. And in that solo, after, well, the first one is with Wayne Shorter's solo. The stuff he's playing is so creative and so based on the music, and he played that in 2 takes. And in my mind, I try to answer Alex's question. Not only is he hitting all the accents beautifully, at one point he plays his trademark, you know, full triplet things around the roll. At one point, at the like crest of the peak of the solo, instead of playing a drum lick, he just clicks his sticks together, which is an old thing people do in marching corps. And it's so subtle and so perfect that he does it right there. And the groove is weaving through the accents and Shorter solo, and under it, Gadd is playing essentially sort of a backwards funk beat. Instead of playing the accent on 2 and 4, he's playing it on 3 as far as the snare drum goes, playing this very bizarre, to me it's just backwards funk. And the way he makes that work. And on the outro vamp, which is also Shorter, he plays these great ideas. Then at the last second, it's a hair late. He plays this really quick roll to blast into the samba section and the outro. And that roll has so much energy and propulsion and power, but it really sounds like, because he's reading the whole thing, which is also amazing if you hear the solo. This is a very complex tune, and he's just blowing through it. He was really at his peak then. But all the ideas he plays, the conception, his drums sound amazing. And in my recent interview with Jim Keltner, he told me he brought in a Ludwig set. And I'm tempted to believe this is even before the days of cartage. So these guys were bringing in their own drum sets, their own musicians. I mean their own musical instruments. And Gadd's drums, which back in the day, in that period, were Yamaha drums with Evans heads, which had a very thick sound, just gave the drums this incredible power and tone. So anyway, that's why I think it's such a great solo. But let's get into these records. I will tell you the right up front that the UHQR is incredible and unbeatable and the best Asia I've ever heard. But the other records all have their place. The original record, the original Asia, is a classic audiophile record. I wrote in my review, adding to its broad stereo spread and precise image placement. My review in STEREOPHILE. The original Asia is packed with iconic sounds. Chuck Rainey's bass, Fagen and Joe Sample's glowing clavinet, Rhodes, and synthesizer playing. You know, Fagen has such a unique way of playing synthesizers on his records, on Steely Dan records. Victor Feldman's vibraphone, Jim Keltner's reverberating trash can lid on Josie, all of Bernard Purdy's great grooves, the Purdy Shuffle and Home at Last. It's just an amazing record with great, great songs. And the original pressing still holds up to my way with any of these pressings. What these two latest reissues does is open everything up and unclutters the soundstage and gives more physical body to each instrument. And everything's quieter, so you hear more detail. The original pressing is still dynamite. The Mo-Fi version is probably the worst of the bunch. The Mo-Fi version tweaks the top end, booms out the low end, and I thought of it like, it's like a balloon covered in powdered sugar. It's unnatural sounding. Because the cymbals are so, I mean, if you push the treble on a Steely Dan album, if you're just pushing it, you kind of make things worse. So this was not great at all. It's funny, I had a copy of Please Please Me, a Mo-Fi, and that stunk too. I mean, a lot of their records are great, but this is not one of them. Now, the Japanese version is really fantastic, and in its own way, it's better than anything else. It's very lush, it's very fat, it's very warm. I kind of compared it to the center of a Mars bar. My editor, Jim Austin, put it up there with Kodachrome. You know, highly saturated, great viscosity, as Herb Reichert would say. And this pressing sounds really wonderful. It's just so full and rich and warm. It's like a single-ended triode amplifier with a lot of tube bloom. This was really great. The new version, as I said, the digital version just cleans everything up and separates all the instruments much more than any of these, so you can really hear everything. For the first time, you hear a lot more detail. Like in the song Asia, in the verses, above it all is this sort of tinkling sound, like little bells being played, and those were really prominent. And what's also cool is on the two new versions, you can really hear Fagen's voice. Now, he doesn't have a great voice. His voice always sounds squeezed to me. It's always very nasally. It's just part of the character of his voice. But there's so much more detail now. And it's not just detail. The noise floor on both of these is so much quieter than any of these. So when you erase the noise floor or lower it, you hear more of everything. And I don't know what they do, but then the instruments come out more. You can really, you know, everything is much more prominent. You can pick things out in the soundstage. Steely Dan records always had great imaging, but the new digital version is just pristine and cleaned up and warm and physical. Now, there are occasional, what I call digital glare you can hear in dynamic peaks. They kind of jump out at you. But that's the only thing I can say. I mean, if you're a fan of this record, that's a no-brainer to buy the new one. It's $30. If you can't afford or don't want to spend the money on the UHQR. But the UHQR just blew my mind. I've been listening all day when I did this, and so my ears were sort of fried. So I had to go out and take a walk, and I came back and really gave it a listen, and it's dead silent, it's uncluttered. The images are so big now, and what's so strange is, more so than any of these other pressings, this sounds more relaxed for some reason. It has plenty of drive. The digital version has the most drive. It's just really propulsive, but this sounds more relaxed, and you relax more in the music when you're listening to this. I don't know what causes that, the lowering of the noise floor, but as I wrote, instruments had more personality and information, from Chuck Rainey's bass to Larry Carlton's guitar. The UHQR's deep silence also introduced surprising subtlety and nuance to Fagen's voice, making him sound more like a 60s beat poet than a snarky 70s LA hipster, which is the vantage point he always sings from. And you can also hear, like, the background vocals are really beautiful, and there's so much sustain on this record on all the instruments. So be it guitar or vibraphones, man, you can just hear them sustain into the blackness. It's really something. I think this is worth 150 bucks. 30,000 is not a lot of pressings for a record that sold in the millions. On Discogs, there's a version from almost every country. Along with all this amazing new detail, there's much more physicality, there's more depth, the images come out, it's much fuller, the sound stage is broader and deeper than any of these other versions, and it's like just sitting in front of a stage watching the band play. It is just incredible how wonderful this sounds. It's not rolled off on top, but it is very easy on the ears, and you can really hear more than the other versions. Chuck Rainey's bass playing, he was just, you know, he's phenomenal, of course, but you can hear how melodic he plays and all these amazing lines that kind of get lost on all the other versions. They're really prominent here. You can pick out every sound from every instrument, and it's just I think it's a fantastic work they've done. I don't own any other UHQRs, but I'm really happy to have gotten this, and I hope you enjoyed this review.